On this worksheet, we're going to practice VLOOKUPs that are not exact matches and a couple other formulas and some conditional formatting. So this is a typical grade sheet. I actually keep Excel spreadsheets for all my students, and they're set up very much like this. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to find out what the percent at for each of my students. And to do that, we divide the amount of points the student has earned by the total amount of points that they could have earned. And then I'm going to multiply by 100. I don't want to see a percent sign because I'm going to use these numbers for my VLOOKUP down here, and these numbers are not percentages. So I will start equals, always an equals, and we're going to divide how many points the student earned by how many points they could have earned, and we want to use this number for all these students, so we're using absolute cell reference. And then we're going to multiply by 100 to get a whole number instead of a decimal. And I only need to see 2 decimal places, so I'm going to decrease this. And then we'll copy this down. Now I want to see what the student's grade is based on this number. And of course I could go down and just type these, but in my real life I am always adding assignments to my spreadsheet, and these grades are always updating. So when we use a formula, the formulas will automatically update for us. So here I am going to use my VLOOKUP, and my VLOOKUP is going to look up this number down here in this table, and then my answer column is the second column. I only have 2 columns in this table. And this VLOOKUP is not an exact match. So when we use VLOOKUPs that are not exact matches and we're using numbers, first of all, our table always has to start from the lowest number to the highest number, and then we have our range. So as soon as one of these numbers hits 90, it will put an A. As soon as one of these numbers is anywhere between 80, anything in the 80s, it will put a B. Anything in the 70s, it will put a C. So let's see what that VLOOKUP looks like. And I'm going to open up this column a little bit to make it easier. So again, equals, and I start typing the name of my function, and I double click. The lookup value, again, I want to look up the student's percent, type a comma. I'm going to look it up in this table, and again, I'm going to copy this down, so my table needs to have absolute cell reference, comma. The column index, or again, the answer, it's in the second column of my table. And this is not an exact match, which is actually the default. So I could hit enter here, but if I type a comma, we can double click on true and hit enter, and oops, close this back down a little bit, and we can copy these down. So again, an easy way to generate the letter grades. Then we're going to do some conditional formatting, so these grades stand out a little bit more and they are easier to read. I think I'm also going to center them. So I have my information selected, and I'm going to go over to conditional formatting. And I can start with the highlight cells rule, equal to, and I'll start with the letter A. And I'm going to use a custom format. So maybe I want my letter A to be white, and then I can go over to fill and put a background in and say OK, and say OK. And we can see all the A's. I'm going to select this again. This time I'll say manage rules. So here's my first rule, and I'll say new rule. Format only cells that contain are equal to B, and I'll click on format. And you don't have to put a fill color in if you don't want to. That's completely your choice. I'll say OK. And if I hit apply here, we can see that our B's get updated. New rule, I'll do one more. Only cells that contain equal to C. Spelling counts, but upper and lowercase does not count. Format, and this time I'll just choose a color. And I'll make it bold and say OK, 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 and there we go. And you will continue to do that for your D and your F. So if one of these grades happens to change, this would automatically get updated. The last thing you're going to do is you'll figure out the average, minimum, and maximum for each assignment. So this should actually go over here. And I'll use the average function. And I can just come up to my auto sum and choose average. I'm going to reselect so that the total down here is not included. We don't want to take our totals with us. And I'll do the same thing for the minimum. Oops. And the same thing for the maximum. And I'm hitting my enter key here. You'll notice these little green markers, and if I click on here, it's saying that this formula omits an adjacent cell, and that's because we didn't include the totals, which we don't want to do. So we can say ignore this error. We could select both of these and ignore that error. It makes it look a little bit cleaner. Then we can just select all of these and drag them over.